So I started off on a good rhythm, got through 8 of these team-by-team season recaps, and then the tumult of the playoffs of the NFL and the off-season cycle, the head coaching carousel of the NFL, and different news and big moves being made, etc. These team-by-team recaps got sidetracked, so time to catch back up. 8 down, 24 to go, quarter of the way there. So I'm going to be in scramble mode this week, trying to get caught up as much as I can before the Super Bowl. So make sure you smash the subscribe button if it's your first time checking me out. So that way you can be updated when I upload other team recaps, and follow me on Twitter. You should follow me on Twitter anyways. Let's talk about the Denver Broncos and their 2020 season. This was the year that they were going to truly turn it over to Drew Lock, be able to hopefully get a full season out of him, and truly find out what they had in him, which was an important thing for the Broncos to do, because this is a guy they didn't invest a first-round pick on, but they still invested a second-round pick, and you needed to know what he had. You need to know what he could bring to the table, and you need, most importantly, to feel like you could get to a place where you could potentially have a definitive answer about whether you want to continue to tie yourself to Drew Lock in the long term, or you're looking for an upgrade in this offseason. And when you look at the Broncos, you had a little bit of reason maybe for some excitement with Drew Lock after his rookie year and some of the sporadic action that he played in. And then you're getting Bradley Chubb back from his torn ACL, and you're sitting there saying, okay, you know what, maybe year 2 under Fangio might have the needle pointing up a little bit. They're not going to be in the Chiefs class, but maybe they could be the second best team in this division. Maybe. But then Von Miller goes down for the year with an injury of his own. So you get back Bradley Chubb just to have to swap out Von Miller for the year, basically. Yeah, that's rough. That's a lot of money sitting there on the injured list. And you're talking about a team that's very, very dependent upon the skills and the disruption ability of Von Miller as an edge rusher. To lose him is definitely a big loss. One guy that isn't your quarterback shouldn't automatically derail your season, but Von Miller, certainly could be thought of as a big loss. And you look at this season and the way it kind of played out for the Broncos. They really struggled in the AFC West. They were only 1-5 in those games. They only got 13 games out of Drew Lock. I know you're saying, well, you got 3/4 plus of the season out of him, but you didn't get all 16 games. And then you had some other key injuries that I think really impacted this team and led him to a spot where instead of thinking about maybe, hanging around and sniffing playoff contention, they finished the season out and ended up in the space where you got a top 10 pick. Offensively, was a big reason for this. They had 9 games where they scored under 20 points. And look, like Fangio's familiar with this. He's like, hey, I'm in Chicago again. There's snow here. There's just mountains this place. But you have more than half of your games where you score 20 points or less on offense, and in this case, all of 9 of them scoring under 20 points. You're really going to struggle to win a lot of games in the modern NFL. Your defense has to be absolutely elite and totally and completely dominant week in and week out to really realistically have a chance. And Denver's defense certainly has talent, but they're not that level of elite or absolute monster unit by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not hard to see why this team struggled. They struggled to score points, put them in bad spots. And Drew Lock, you look at his season, and it was, He only completed 57% of his passes, 16 touchdowns, but 18 turnovers. Like, to me this year, he looked more like the wildly inconsistent guy that I frankly thought the Broncos reached for a little bit when they took him in the second round in 2019. You get a flash from him and you're like, my goodness, he can do that. But then you also see Drew Lock and you say, oh, he can also do that. And it's not so good. So you're probably leaning more on the scale of he's not the long-term answer than you are that he is the long-term answer at this point. Jerry Jeudy, I think, showed some flashes. I look forward to seeing what he can do next year and the years going forward as he continues to develop his skills. It really hurt this offense, though, to only get 1 game out of Cortland Sutton. There's going to be your number 1 wide receiver. And just like with Von Miller on the defense, one of your top guys, you only have him for one, you basically have him for nothing. And then you have Cortland Sutton for 1 game. Like when I mentioned earlier, the Broncos had some key injuries in some key spots that really killed them this year. These were an example of it. They brought in Melvin Gordon, and he had an okay, adequate year, but it certainly wasn't great, special, or game-changing for this team. Frankly, I didn't see where he was that much of an upgrade over a Philip Lindsay, personally. And defensively was not great. You would expect maybe a little bit better of a Vic Fangio coached unit, but they had 6 games where they allowed 30 or more points. They finished 25th against the run, 16th against the pass, and 21st in total yards allowed. You know, for a team that when they won the Super Bowl back in that 2015 season, like they carried Peyton Manning's washed-up self to a title. That's how great and dominant that defense was. But now you've got a defensive-minded head coach, and the defense is struggling, maybe not quite as bad as the offense, but certainly struggling for sure. So it's not a surprise that some Broncos fans have maybe been calling for Vic Fangio's head. I'll say this. Like, if you don't see a big turnaround next year, he gone. And his seat might be warm, especially with the Broncos bringing in a new general manager to take over some of those responsibilities from Elway. You know, the clock is ticking on Vic. He's got to have a team that performs better in 2021. Realistically, I look at this roster and I don't see how many coaches would do much better than with the hand that Fangio was dealt. That's just me personally. Like, maybe you don't like things about him, decisions that he makes, strategy, so forth, but he's not done that bad of a job. He's just, what does he really have to work with? Like I referenced in the offseason already, they've hired George Patton to be their new general manager. And I think now that you bring the new GM into the fold and you've got a couple of years to look at Drew Lock, you really got to go into this offseason first and foremost to figure out what exactly are you going to do with Drew Lock? Is he going to be the guy that you hand the keys to the organization again in 2021? Are you looking at potentially adding somebody via free agency, via a trade, via the draft? Like, I would certainly expect to hear the Broncos' name associated with some of these quarterback moves. Obviously, they lost out on the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes. I don't know how much they were really in it, but this is a team where certainly you can't put it all on Drew Lock, and he's not the only problem by any stretch of the imagination, but they definitely need an upgrade there. And I would be surprised if they didn't pursue some type of upgrade in this offseason. They've got about $20 million in cap space to work with, but what's the decision on Von Miller's option? Are you going to decline the option? Are you going to potentially risk losing him? That's a question that's yet to be settled. And then you got guys like Jarrell Casey and Kareem Jackson, AJ Boye, that you got to make decisions on whether you're going to bring them back into the fold or not. Probably the biggest decision outside of maybe the Von Miller piece is, trying to get a deal done with Justin Simmons, to bring him back into the fold. But I look at this team, it's like they don't have a ton of cap space. A lot of teams won't have a ton of cap space this year. So very interesting to see how the free agency marketplace will actually work out. For the Broncos, you're in a spot where you're picking in the top 10. You got to hit on some of these draft picks this year, and you got to hope they can come in and contribute right away. To me, their biggest need is at the quarterback position. I don't think that can really be argued. Even if you're a Lock fan, like, you could do better, and you can do better there. Then I would say on the defense, they really need a quarterback of that defense, and I think they need somebody at that inside linebacker position that could potentially be a difference maker for them. Which is why you probably will hear quite a bit of talk about maybe a guy like a Micah Parsons being in the consideration for that 9th overall pick, but long way to go in the draft process. He could certainly fall. But I wouldn't be surprised that they targeted a inside linebacker if they didn't do it in round 1, certainly on day 2. And then you look at that defense, they could use some help at corner, and I also think along that defensive line, like they have holes and gaps at all 3 levels of their defense that need to be addressed. Vic Fangio is a quality, outstanding defensive coach, but you also got to have some of the Jimmies and Joes that can effectively run those X's and O's. Otherwise, it's not going to matter all that much. And I would say even with the acquisition of Melvin Gordon, you already have Philip Lindsay, like you certainly maybe use an upgrade at the running back position, maybe a more dynamic kind of dual threat back, or specifically a third down change of pace type of back that you could fold into the mix. You're pretty good at wide receiver, it seems like. You got some improved play out of the offensive line. Noah Fant, I think, developed and took a step forward in year 2. So the talent cupboard is not totally bare in Denver. It's just, where are the difference makers? Where are the true franchise level type of stars? And what do you have at quarterback? And just like with so many other teams, if the Broncos don't get that quarterback position addressed and get it right, nothing else is really going to be mattering, and you're probably looking at having to hire a new head coach next offseason.